Analog thoughts.
Analogue thoughts.
Analog thoughts.
Analog thoughts. Analog thoughts.
Analog thoughts.
Skibbity bop, don't stop. No, I got that skiddly dop, bip bop, doon scattly dim bop, some down ziddly doo. Way too much caffeine going on inside my mind. But you know what they say. Life updates with me, grinding at this book, per usual. Here we are. Not too much going on other than that. Put up ye old Christmas tree last night, looking very proper. Felix updates. Felix is doing great. Today he put on a Viking helmet that had horns, and he was just playing with his toy school bus wearing the Viking helmet. Very cute, very precious, he's very much a warrior. He rides into battle, and he will defend the downtrodden and will hold himself to a righteous standard. A true warrior. Before we get going on today's topic, I just want to plug a couple things, but I want to plug my Patreon, and I want to also encourage you to leave a like, a rating, a comment, or do a share thingy. I know this is streaming on all the platforms, so whatever your preferred listening platform is, if you can click that button, leave that comment, leave that rating, that helps me out a ton. And then also, I do have a Patreon. If you'd like to go above and beyond just rating and sharing, I have a Patreon where you get early access to this podcast, early access to any music or art that I make, and a bunch of other stuff. I'm going to be sharing updates for the book that I'm writing in there as well. So if you'd like to get dialed into that frequency, that link will be in the show's notes. I hope everybody's doing well. I have not yet hit a seasonal depression slump quite yet. Might not happen this year. We'll see. I don't want to say. I feel like every year I think like, oh, this winter will be different. And then inevitably, it's weird though. It usually is either just right before Christmas or slightly after. Something about the holidays mixed with the lack of sun, mixed with the year kind of like having a retrospective on your year. It doesn't make me like depressed. I don't actually get like super depressed, but I do get the like seasonal blues that I feel like most of us get. And if you're going through that now, you're not alone. Like, hang in there. We are here with you. We feel you. You are not going through this alone. So many people are feeling the same way you're feeling. It's normal. It's part of being human, and I know these words don't make it hurt any less, but trust me, the sun will return. We will get back to a full, bright perspective, and things will change and get better, and hang in there. I watched this video recently about the global population and kind of what's going on with it. There's a lot of misconceptions about the population decline and the population crisis, and I watched a video by this channel called Kurz Cassat that really broke things down on an interesting, or on a really deep level about what is going on with the global population and what it's going to look like over the next century or so, and how that's going to impact impact everything. It's going to impact our economy, our social hierarchies, our social structures. It's going to impact the climate. It's going to impact infrastructure. Everything is being impacted by what's going on right now with the global population decline. And essentially, we're not completely shrinking yet globally, but we are on track to shrink significantly. And while that might actually sound like it could be a good thing, and in some ways it could be a good thing, once we hit that projected shrink, there's going to be a lot of problems that come with this. And there's going to be options for solutions as well. basically, if you didn't know, right now, a bunch of scientists, a bunch of people much smarter than me, are projecting, based on current birth rates and fertility rates, that our global population is set to shrink significantly over the next 60 to 70 years. There are some people, like the psychopath Elon Musk, that is having like 100 babies to try to remedy this problem. And for the record, I'm not a birther person. If you don't want kids, live that life. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying you are part of the problem because you're not having babies. You don't owe anyone a child. That is not what I'm saying right now. But you also shouldn't be out there. You also shouldn't be out there having like 100 kids. And then there's climate activists who would be very stoked about this population decrease that is happening / slated to happen even more if it were to have happened decades ago. But unfortunately, this dip in population is coming too late to have an actual impact before we hit a critical breaking point with climate change. And I'm going to talk more about that later. And on the surface, just in a simple way, it might seem like less people would mean more resources to go around for everyone, more jobs, more potential wealth distribution. But it doesn't really work that way. When the global population dips like this, like it's going to, like it's starting to and will continue to do, there are going to be a lot of problems that come along with it. And just speaking on resources alone, right now there's already enough resources to go around. We have way more resources as a species than we need. It's just a matter of distribution and equal rights to those resources. And I'm kind of starting to get ahead of myself. So let's dissect this from the ground up so we can get the full picture on how all of this works and what the future holds for the population of the Earth. Before I really get going, I want to thank a few sources for providing me with information on this, because I really relied on them heavily to get some of this data correct. The first one I already mentioned, Kurzgesagt, which is it's a YouTube channel that I follow, and you should follow them too. It's spelled Kurzgesagt. If you go to YouTube and try to type Kurzgesagt and you get the spelling even slightly right, it'll pop up. You'll see it. You'll find it. But that is I watched a video on their channel that talked about the population situation that's going on. And I really wanted to give them a shout out for compiling all of this information and doing so many checks on the data and making sure everything was correct. Everything that they presented in the video was correct. I also relied on the PEW Research Center. They had a lot of stats and really fact-checked information. And then a third resource I used for this one was bsr.org. I don't always cite my sources, although I probably should. It's just I typically use so many sources. I feel like for the listener, it's like, why would you want to hear all of that? But for this one, I wanted to mention these as well. I wanted to mention that I use these because these three places had a wealth of information that I leaned on, especially Kurzgesagt. And I know that Kurzgesagt is super diligent about cross-referencing, and I wanted to make sure that they got a proper shout-out on this because they did a lot of the legwork for me, at least on the numbers side of things, because I don't like to look up. Whenever I say facts, air quotes, facts on whenever I say facts on the show, I always like to cross-reference those facts with 3 or 4 different places of information, 3 or 4 different sources. Kurzgesagt allowed me to be able to know that my facts were vetted, and I still did cross-reference some of these numbers, and they were all on point. They all sat where they needed to sit across the board. Anyway, shout-outs to those 3 sources, Kurzgesagt, Pew Research, and bsr.org for having this information readily available. You can also get on the just UN's website and see the numbers across the board on all kinds of stats, global stats. Let's get into it. Every 2 years, 1 million Japanese disappear. China's population will be halved by the end of the century, and the median age in Italy right now is 48. Everywhere around the world, birth rates are dropping, and this is statistical information. You can look it up and see the numbers. Globally, we are having less babies. Before, long ago, for thousands and thousands of years, the global population didn't really grow at all. Long time ago, like hunter-gatherer times, we had to deal with disease, predators, war, famine, and all of that just lovely stuff. So our population kind of stayed the same for a really long time. Then the Industrial Revolution happened and the human population exploded. And to give you an idea, we were sitting well below the 2 billion mark of people on Earth in 1900. And then by 1999, we reached 6 billion people. That's a 4 billion person jump in less than 100 years. That's insane. And then 24 years after 1999, when we get to the 6 billion mark, we hit 8 billion. That's 2 billion person growth in less than 25 years. Immense growth, insane amounts of growth. And the population is, the global population right now is projected to grow for another 60 to 70 years. We're going to keep getting bigger. And even though this growth is happening, we're still having babies. Growth has slowed and is slowing immensely. This population increase is slated to decline based on the amount of babies we are having now as a species, based on the amount of children that are being born now. Even though our population is still growing, we've hit a lull. And in another generation, another 60 or 70 years, we're going to start to see that number go down, and it's going to go down a lot. I'm going to break this down. For a population to remain stable and not decline in numbers, every couple needs to have 2 children. If the average number goes over 2, the population grows. If it dips below 2, the population shrinks. And so it's pretty easy to understand. It makes sense. Most of my friends, personally, in my own life, do not have children. And the ones that do have children only have 1. And I used to think I was in some kind of outlier pocket, some kind of like thing that wasn't a reflection of the rest of the world. Like my friends just don't want kids. But it turns out that my bubble isn't just my bubble. Most of the world is doing this. And if you're listening to this, there's a very good chance that you're in a similar situation, that like most of the people in their, I'm in my mid-30s. So most of the people in their mid-30s in your life probably don't have kids, or if they do, they probably only have 1 kid. Or people in my age range, like people in their mid-20s up to mid-30s. Those people in your life probably don't have any kids or have 1 kid. So globally, we are shrinking. The numbers won't be reflected for, like I said, another 60 to 70 years, but the shrink is coming. Those numbers are inevitable just based on how many kids when I say we, I mean the world is having right now. And this has already happened in specific countries. It's how we can kind of analyze these population numbers and apply them on a global scale, kind of. In South Korea, their average kid count was 0.8 kids per household in 2022. Most people weren't having kids. In 2022, they had the lowest fertility rate. And the breakdown goes like this. 100 South Koreans will now have 40 kids. And those 40 kids will have 16 kids. And of those 16 kids, they'll have 6 kids. That's just after a handful of generations. And that's the projection based on their current birth rate. If South Korea continues at that birth rate over the next century, there will be 94% fewer young people. Their population will it'll kind of implode. More elderly than capable workers and people to take care of the elderly. There will be more elderly people than there will be people to take care of them. And I'm going to talk more on that conundrum in a minute or so. But in 1950, South Korea had 20 million people. In 2023, they had 52 million people. If their birth rate continues where it is right now, in 2100, they will have 24 million, almost the amount that they had in 1950, if their birth rate continues where it's at now, which it's projected to. And there are a variety of reasons that these projections, to calculate these projections, but basically here in less than 100 years, their population is going to diminish to the number it was back in 1950. So South Korea isn't the only one, though. This is a global situation. Not that birth rates are lowering in all countries. They're not, but we're talking about globally here. The full numbers of all the people on Earth combined, that number is declining. The amount of babies being born globally. I touched on this a little already, but the main problem with all of this isn't necessarily the population decline itself. It's the population median age overall. So just bringing it back to the South Korean context. If birth rates continue as they are, in 2100, the average age in South Korea will be 59. That means most people will be almost 60. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being 60. I don't want to seem ageist, and I don't want you to think like, oh, everyone's going to be 60. But I don't think I need to explain why a population of almost retired or retired people is not a great situation to be in. Let's talk about China, who has some of the biggest and who had some of the biggest and fastest industrialization of any country. Their population exploded during the Industrial Revolution. And I think that it's pretty common knowledge that explosion of industrialization and population became a problem for China. Most people started to prefer smaller families because of how crowded things were getting, and eventually the government imposed the one-child regulation, making families have only one kid. You're only able to have one child. Our population exploded too quickly. So because of this, China has had a low birth rate, a low kid count for decades, since the 1980s. And their goal was obviously to lower the population, to turn 100 Chinese people into about 20 after 4 or so generations. And now China has one of the lowest fertility rates of all of the countries in Asia. So they're having less and less and less and less and less babies. In 2015, Latin America and the Caribbeans fell below the replacement point. They fell below having that, the 2-child average household. So they fell below. And in the US, the only reason that our population grows substantially like it does is because of immigration. If it weren't for immigration, we wouldn't be growing like we are. There are still some countries, though, that haven't hit this population deficit, that haven't gone below the 2-child average households. A lot of the Middle East, a lot of Africa are still growing, are still haven't reached that, haven't gone below the replacement point of their population. But there are concerns about their population growth having some of the impact that Asia had during the Industrial Revolution. They're concerned that they're going to have another Chinese population conundrum on their hands. But a lot of those concerns are kind of being mitigated by technology and awareness, and they're not as big of a concern now that we have the hindsight to see, now that they have the hindsight to see what a population explosion like that looks like. They have ways to counteract or counterbalance that. And a lot of scientists say that even these growing countries, over the next century, their populations will start to decrease. I'll talk about why that is a little later as well. It mostly has to do with countries that are doing well. They don't have as many people having children just across the board. But even the current population growth of these countries that aren't shrinking, it's not stacking up to the global replacement rate situation. These outliers that are countries that are still growing, still have high fertility and birth rates, they aren't picking up the slack, basically, that all of the other countries are creating. So why does all of this matter? Why do we care? Where are we headed as a species, as a planet? Why is this important? Why are all of these statistics and these numbers and this knowledge of a decreasing global population, why does it matter? For a society to work, you need enough able-bodied people to make it actually work. And by that I mean people in their early 20s to their mid 60s. That's the quote able-bodied population. These are the people that are working jobs, building bridges and roads and taking care of the elderly, teachers, plumbers, computer programmers, all of that. All of those jobs are mostly done by people in their 20s to mid 60s. These working people are responsible for creating a society's wealth. And when you're not in that able-bodied window where you're working, you're not generating wealth. You're not making money. And also, the majority of healthcare costs are generated by seniors. So, with the population situation, this is an obvious problem. People working way past retirement age, exploding healthcare costs, poverty. It's a lot like what is happening in the United States and a lot of other countries that in this trend will continue to develop over the next, who knows, until we address this and figure it out. Who knows how long we'll be faced with these problems. By 2050, China's working age is projected to shrink by 200 million people. Globally, the financial burden of caring for the elderly won't be sustainable, even for the richest countries. There won't be enough people working to generate enough wealth or even have enough time to dedicate to taking care of the elderly in a sustainable way. And there have been books and movies about this conundrum. It's not a new discovery. It's something very real that we as a species are going to have to address, that we are addressing right now. It's like a puzzle that we have to put together, and a lot of people are looking to technology to try to help connect some of these dots, but there isn't really one way that all this is going to unfold. There's going to be a lot of different kinds of answers to all of these problems globally. And not to stay super doom and gloom here, but I want to talk about some of the other ramifications population decline has, because that's why we're getting into this. We want to know why this matters. We want to know why these stats mean anything to us. Another thing that is projected to happen, and that has already happened in some countries, is the collapse of infrastructure. Bridges, streets, homes, the upkeep of everything, all of that, it's kept up by the working age, the 20 to 60s. And we can see it in Japan. People go on tours of dying towns on the countryside, and you can watch videos on YouTube of these dead or dying towns. They're actually really creepy. They're not, these towns don't die completely because of lower birth rates. there are other economic factors, but a lot of the reason that there are these dead towns, a lot of that is due to the birth rate and fertility decrease. And you can see that based on their current population. Over 28% of Japan's residents are 65 years old or older. So they're seeing some of this disruption of infrastructure and people leaving, looking for opportunities because their towns can't facilitate this median age disruption. Let's talk about resources. I touched on this a little earlier, but it would seem at first that if there are less people, we would have more resources to go around. And like I already said, globally, we've got plenty of resources, plenty to go around already. With the population decline, though, and the working age decline, there won't be as many able-bodied people generating, farming, harvesting, and distributing resources. So yeah, less people will be consuming things, but we will also have less people to create and distribute things as well. And that kind of segues into my next point about, and this is another thing we're seeing pretty much across the board, is that elected officials are deciding to represent the fears and interests of the elderly population. This is bad. Youth being the minority means that they have less of a sway and a say during elections and decision making. And this is bad for a variety of reasons. It is harder to pass more progressive laws when people who have a vested interest in the old laws that aren't a benefit to the entire country remain in power. And I don't think that's something any of us haven't seen. Old ways that get pushed aside for new and better and progressive ways, that's just the way the world goes. As humans, we are living better than we used to. And a lot of that has to do with making better laws. And sure, antiquated laws often have a history of transforming and just becoming more hidden and under the surface, or they masquerade under the guise of new laws. But overall, it's best to get younger minds into the picture. I'm not saying that we need a government that's run by people in their 20s. That would be bad too. That would be bad. But also, on the flip side of that, we don't want a government completely run by people in their 60s either, 60s and older, which is currently what we have, and it's not working, at least not in the United States. And it hasn't been working for a hot minute. And if the majority of candidates available are elderly and the majority of voters are elderly, statistically, we're going to have even more elderly people in positions of power. That's just how this will most likely unfold. And it's not a good thing. It'd be bad. It'd be bad either way. What we need is a full spectrum of ages and races and perspectives and sexes in positions of power to collectively be making decisions that benefit everyone, not rich, old white dudes. So speaking of situations that are best for everyone, I want to talk about situations that are best for the environment. It kind of feels like less people would have a positive impact on the actual environment. Less cars, less emissions, less plane flights, less water usage and pollution and all that. And yeah, that is all true. That's all absolutely true. But here's the problem with this. And the numbers are in. Once again, the numbers are in, and I hate to just be doom and gloom, but here we are. We are already at a critical breaking point with the environment and the climate crisis. The process of population decline at this point is too slow to have much of a positive impact on the environment. Like I said, we're still going to grow for the next 60 to 70 years. More people, more emissions, more pollution, all of that. And we're going to grow at an exponential rate. And the environment is already right now at a breaking point. So adding another potentially 70 years of exponential population growth on top of what we already have going on, it's going to be like, it's not fast enough. The decline, the positives we would see from a declining population aren't going to happen fast enough in terms of the environment. And you can call it fake, you can call it a liberal conspiracy, you can call it fear-mongering. This is none of that. This is real, y'all. We need to be applying way more resources to science and technologies to figure this out. Population is just a piece of this really big problem that is unfolding with the environment. It's like I was talking about earlier with the population boom, how we increased by 6 billion people in less than 125 years. We are dealing with the environmental impact of that right now. And it turns out that the Earth was not ready for those numbers and that amount of pollutants and waste that come with that many humans being born in that short amount of time. Let's rewind things just a little bit. Population decrease has potential positives, things that will be good for everyone, but, and a big but, if we don't solve the climate crisis in the next 60 to 70 years, none of those positives will matter at all. If we want to see the positives from a decreasing population, we have to figure things out now. We have to do things about the environment now. Back to stabilizing our populations. So how do we climate all of the ramifications of this destabilization of the population? Let's put that aside for now and think about how do we restabilize it. The U.S. population remains stable because of immigration. We are a country that has always been a soup of mixing cultures and people from other places. Somewhere along the way, we kind of forgot about that as a country, but that is where we are. That is what we have always been. And it would stand to reason that immigration could be the solution to the population situation. Bring people in from other countries that need work and can help stabilize the population, economy, and the country. And as we're seeing in the US, that thought or that idea to solve the problem, it doesn't always work. One of the reasons it's not working here in the United States is because our new orange overlord is planning to deport a lot of people that are helping to stabilize our population and our economy and our workforce, and he's using fear to do that. He's using good old fear. It's a rich white dude's favorite weapon is fear. It has always been, and it will always probably just be fear. But even beyond that, let's say we have a country run by someone who isn't an orange lunatic. We would need a constant influx of immigrants to be coming here all the time. And that just isn't sustainable long term for a variety of reasons. And the biggest reason is that birth rates are dropping almost everywhere. The reason immigrants can't keep coming in to stabilize our population is because the populations globally are destabilizing. It's like trying to be butter scraped over too much bread. It just doesn't work. And right now, people from poorer countries migrate to more developed countries looking for a better life. But if those developing countries decline, which they are, because of the birth situation, why would they come here? Why would they go somewhere that was just as had just as many problems as their current country? They would stay where they're at because the juice of moving your whole life somewhere else wouldn't be worth the squeeze. Here's a really interesting kind of poetic conundrum. At the end of the century, Africa will have the population with the most younger people in the world. the most people in the working age. 35 will be their median age, which is young for a country, and it will be the youngest. They'll have the most able-bodied workers, the most people who can get things done, and those people will probably be a huge asset that countries with older populations will want so they can stabilize things in their own countries. And I could see huge deals with elderly countries incentivizing people from Africa to come work and live in their countries. Countries like the United States. And wouldn't that just be, that would just be so wild? A country built on the backs of slaves stolen from Africa, begging and incentivizing young people from Africa to come and work and live in the United States. And it will probably happen within the next century. That reality will probably be real. Or that reality will be real. That scenario will come true. It seems counterintuitive to many people, but immigration is so beneficial for societies. And that's why right now, the orange man, the buffoon orange man is setting us up for failure. He's setting the United States up for failure. He's turning away so many people. And you can say, like, oh, I hear so many people say, like, especially living in Ohio, we're a red state. I love Ohio, but it can really suck here sometimes. And I hear a lot of people say, I don't really care if they come here. They just have to do it legally. And that is such an ignorant statement, because coming here legally is not easy at all. Look it up. Put yourself in the struggling shoes of the people trying to come here. It is not easy at all. And that is by design. Even for us in the United States, if we wanted to go and move to another country to work and live, it is not easy. And a lot of other countries aren't even operating on the racism and xenophobia that our government operates under. It's not easy to just come to the US and work, especially if you're not white. This population thing is a huge topic. It affects us all. It affects every person, all of humanity, our species moving forward. But it's not all doom and gloom. I know a lot of this episode has been like, here are the problems. Look at it through this lens. Like, a lot of this birth decline means that we are crushing it as a species, that the world isn't as bad as it was. Women are freer, more educated, and have more money than they did in the past. And it turns out that across the board, globally, there is this phenomenon, which I think I talked about this earlier, but there's this phenomenon where if a society is better off, they typically decide to have fewer kids. So globally, since we are having fewer kids, it's a good metric that we are doing a lot better than we were before. That living on Earth isn't as hard as it used to be, just overall. Another reason we're seeing lower birth rates too is that cultures across the world are operating on the premise of individualism. It's not, it takes a village anymore. Long ago, it literally would be like a village raising kids and coming together and exchanging resources. And it's not as much like that anymore on a micro or macro scale. People place a high value on themselves and having time and energy and resources to be themselves and explore their interests. And also, technology has a lot to do with this, specifically computers and social media. People are busy with themselves and their own lives. They're too busy to be having kids. And once again, I'm not shaming anyone in that department. If you don't want kids, don't have kids. You don't owe anyone a baby. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that the idea of individualism is probably stronger than it's ever been, and it definitely has had an impact on the global birth rates. Some other countries are incentivizing having kids, and the U.S. does this too. The U.S. gives you money on your taxes for if you have kids, and you get some healthcare benefits, but that's about it. Not much of an incentive for people to have children exists in the United States. But I could honestly see it becoming a trend to reward people for having kids more in the US and in other countries in the not too distant future. Things like cheaper housing, better healthcare, cheap and or free childcare. These will probably be ways that countries incentivize people to have more kids to restabilize the country. And with all this, as humans, we won't die out because we're having less kids. The composition of the median population will change, but we aren't going anywhere. At least not because of that. We're going to figure this out because we kind of have to. All right, I've been yapping long enough about all of this. Let's get into a segment of the podcast I like to call Let's Ask AI.
Let's ask AI.
Today I asked AI, what are some ways that we can mitigate the negative effects of declining global birth rates? And AI answered, the prospect of a declining global population in the future could lead to significant social, economic, and environmental changes. Here are strategies to mitigate or offset potential negative impacts. Support family-friendly policies. Governments can offer incentives like parental leave, affordable childcare, housing subsidies, and education to support or encourage larger families. Promote work-life balance. Flexible work arrangements and family-focused workplace policies can make having children more viable for families. Increase productivity through automation. Invest in technology and AI to compensate for labor shortages while ensuring equitable distribution of productivity gains. Reimagine retirement. Create flexible retirement systems and encourage lifelong learning to enable older workers to stay in the workforce longer if they choose. Diversity economics. Shift from labor-intensive industries to knowledge-based and innovation-driven sectors. Streamline immigration policies. Attract younger, skilled workers from countries with growing populations to balance workforce declines. Focus on integration. Ensure migrants are well supported through language, education, cultural programs, and job placement services to strengthen societal cohesion. I'm going to read that one again. Ensure migrants are well supported through language, education, cultural programs, and job placement services to strengthen societal cohesion. Smart urban planning. Design cities for smaller populations. Focus on energy efficiency, accessible healthcare, and sustainable infrastructure. Revitalize rural areas. Encourage relocation to underpopulated areas through subsidies and digital connectivity programs. Expand access to education, particularly in regions with high fertility rates, to empower individuals to make informed decisions about family planning. Empower women. Promote gender equality in education, employment, and healthcare to ensure balanced societal development. Rethink environmental sustainability. Optimize land use. Use declining population trends to restore ecosystems, rewild certain areas, and promote sustainable agriculture. Focus on renewable energy. Prepare for lower energy demand with systems that minimize environmental impact. There's just a few more of these. Innovate in elder care. Use technology and community programs to provide quality care for aging populations. Expand volunteerism. Foster intergenerational programs where younger and older populations collaborate to support each other. Share solutions across borders. Countries with declining populations can learn from those managing similar challenges effectively, coordinate economic systems. Global trade and labor sharing agreements can balance disparities between population booming and population declining nations. Reframe aging. Promote the value of experience and wisdom brought by older generations to combat ageism. Support sustainable lifestyles. Emphasize quality of life over quantity of growth, reducing overconsumption and prioritizing well-being. I always love the positive spin that AI brings to the situation, and I knew that AI would do that for this question, and that's kind of that's what this podcast needed. I did a lot of doom and gloom today, and AI brought it back with a lot of the solutions that we're going to need to tackle this ever growing or declining problem. All right, let's move on to the last segment of the podcast, the fun facts of the day, and then we'll wrap this thing up. It took only 12 years to go from 7 billion people in 2011 to 8 billion people in 2022. A billion people in 12 years. China and India together make up over 1/3 of the global population. Vatican City has the smallest population of any country with fewer than 800 residents. Over 50% of the world's population now lives in urban areas. By 2050, this is expected to rise to around 68%. Tokyo, Japan, is the largest metropolitan area in the world, home to nearly 37 million people. And for a frame of reference here, there are 9 million people in New York City. Tokyo has 37 million. There are approximately 26.5 billion chickens on Earth. The chickens outnumber us by so many chickens. The world's ant population is estimated to be 20 quadrillion ants. To put that into perspective, for every human on Earth, there are 2.5 million ants. So you listening, you represent 2.5 million ants. It's insane. So many ants out there. Who would win, do you think? The 2.5 million ants or the 26.5, or I'm sorry. Who would win? The 20 quadrillion ants or the 26.5 billion chickens? That'd be a battle for the ages. Could someone simulate that? Send it to me, please. I'd love to see this simulation play out. In 10,000 BCE, the global population was between 1 and 5 million, roughly the size of a modern-day city like Sydney or Singapore. I thought this next one was interesting. Iceland runs an app to prevent accidental dating between cousins. Since the population is so small, it's 393,600 people, so below 400,000 people in Iceland. So they have an app that's like, make sure you're not related to this person. And our last fun fact, which also a very interesting fact. There's this thing called the birthday paradox. It is a mathematical phenomenon that states that there is a greater than 50% chance that two people in a group of 23 people have the same birthday. We have 46 chromosomes that are organized into 23 pairs. 23 people, 50% chance. Coincidence? I think not. All right, that wraps up the fun facts. That wraps up the podcast. We've had problems before. We will have problems again. It just goes and goes and goes and goes. That is how the world works. As humans, collectively, we will overcome, we will figure this out, and we will find a way to move forward. I promise. One last plug on my Patreon. If you'd like to get involved over there, The link is in the show's notes. Hit those comments, hit those ratings, all that jazz. I'll see you all next time. And until then, check on your mental health. Check on the mental health of your loved ones. Bye.
Thoughts. Analog thoughts.
Analog thoughts.
Analog thoughts.
Analog thoughts.
Analogue thoughts.